Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the next in our Inside Sustainability series of webinars. This afternoon we have for you an Associate Director in our Policy and Markets team, Simon Rotalick, who's going to present to you some information about our latest work in Mexico. Simon.
Thanks very much. I'm going to say a few words about a program of energy efficiency for small and medium-sized companies that we've been developing in conjunction with government agencies and other key stakeholders in Mexico. But before I jump into the detail, I wanted to say a few words about what I'm going to cover today. You'll see on the agenda slide. I'll say a few words about the Carbon Trust for those of you who aren't familiar with us, a little bit about the policy context that this initiative takes place in. Mexico's a fast-moving environment for policy, both in climate and energy space. I'll say a few words about that. A little too about the importance of SMEs and the importance of energy efficiency when it comes to economic value to Mexico. Moving on to the sorts of barriers that SMEs face when it comes to improving energy efficiency. And then explaining a little bit about our program and what it seeks to do, and then lastly looking at what the reach of the program will be and the sort of impact we hope it will have. So starting with the Carbon Trust. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Carbon Trust is a mission-driven organisation. Our mission is to accelerate the move to a sustainable, low-carbon economy. And we do that on a not-for-profit basis. We reinvest any surpluses we do make in the pursuit of our mission. We specialise in three areas, really, as independent experts. One, we advise businesses, governments, and the public sector on their opportunities. Initially, obviously, clearly, with regards to carbon abatement, but now increasingly with regards to other key resource issues, including water and waste. And we help those organisations realise those opportunities cost effectively. We also measure and certify the environmental footprint of organisations as well as products and services with the Carbon Trust standard, which now exists for water waste as well as carbon, and through our Carbon Trust footprint label for products and services. We also develop and deploy low-carbon technologies and solutions through a number of avenues. One is providing finance for cost-effective energy efficiency technologies for companies to invest in, through to focusing on innovation in low-carbon technologies, bringing down costs and ensuring some of the technologies that we need in order to meet our ambitious emission reduction targets are there when we need them. And over the years, the Carbon Trust has had a significant impact in terms of carbon and energy reduced. Our advice alone has enabled our customers to save over $7 billion in energy costs and cut emissions by almost 50 million tonnes of CO2, with a lifetime cost effectiveness of $8 per tonne of CO2 reduced. We've also, through the work we do with our Carbon Trust standard, awarded over 1,000 certifications of the standard since its beginning, and put the carbon reduction label on products and services with annual sales of around $4.8 billion. We also track the impact of our innovation programs, and we know they are actively helping to accelerate cost reduction in some of the key technologies needed, such as offshore wind and marine renewables. And we're also very keen to achieve leverage for the work that we do, and we know that our work's leveraged over $4.8 billion of private sector investment in the low carbon sector. So, moving on to Mexico, over the last couple of years, the Carbon Trust has built on its experience in the areas that I've just outlined, focusing primarily on the UK, to internationalise the work we do. We've been asked to help in a number of countries, including in Latin America, and one of those countries, certainly one of the countries that we've done the most work in over the last 2 years, is Mexico. And Mexico provides a very supportive environment for the work of the Carbon Trust. There are a number of drivers that mean that the government and the business sector there is very interested in reducing energy use, in building a low carbon economy. Mexico is the only other country in the world other than the UK to have passed a binding climate change law. The law in Mexico stipulates that the country should reduce its emissions by about 30% by 2020 and by 50% by 2050 below 2000 levels. That law was passed with bipartisan support, and it's been encouraging that it has been passed with that sort of support, because obviously clearly with a change in government that's just happened in Mexico from one party to another, there would potentially have been fears that the law wouldn't have been supported by the incoming government, but there are absolutely no indications that that's the case. The incoming Peña Nieto administration has committed itself to implementing the law and put in place a number of new initiatives, interministerial processes and committees to ensure that it is implemented. There are a couple of other drivers, though, for low-carbon policy in Mexico that are significant, particularly for the incoming government. We know that the Peña Nieto administration has a couple of really key priorities. One of them, unsurprisingly, is a major focus on policies to support economic development. And what's interesting here is that the government sees the role of SMEs as being very important in achieving that priority. They recognise the importance of SMEs in terms of contributing to greater productivity and growth in Mexico. And with that in mind, they've set up an institute that sits within the Ministry for Business, Economia, an institute they've called INADEM, which is, as I said, specifically set up to support SMEs across the country to ensure that they're well placed to drive economic growth in Mexico. Another key driver of policy for the Peña Nieto administration is energy security. It's interesting to note that energy consumption in Mexico is growing faster than GDP. From the year 2000 to 2011, average energy consumption grew by just over 2%, while GDP growth was at about 1.8%. We also know that Mexico is increasingly relying on energy imports as domestic production of fossil fuels, chiefly petroleum, has stagnated in recent years after declining significantly from its peak in 2004. So energy production has declined by about 0.3% per year between 2000 and 2011. If that trend continues, Mexico will transform from an energy exporter to an energy importer with a structural energy deficit beginning in the year 2020. It's a key driver of policy, and that's incarnated in particular through the energy reform bill that the Mexican president has put to Congress. One of its key objectives is to open up the state-owned utility in the oil sector, Pemex, for private investment, and we will see how far that goes and whether or not it succeeds in that ambition, and indeed whether or not it includes wider issues than the fate of the oil sector, but it's certainly a major piece of legislative change that's being anticipated. We can also see the focus on energy security in the national energy strategy that's been published by SME, the energy ministry in Mexico, in which a commitment to increased energy efficiency measures is clear. The national energy statement says that a key strategic objective is to promote energy efficiency both in consumption and in the processes of energy production. It says that the use of best practice and technologies will reduce energy consumption without impacting the country's growth, without losing sight of the fact that savings require long-term effort. They also clearly state that they see improved energy efficiency as something that boosts productivity of the economy, promotes new markets, and reduces the stress on Mexico's energy systems. We can also see the emphasis on a commitment to tackle energy efficiency through the renewed leadership within the body that's been set up within Mexico to drive energy efficiency, CONOE, the National Commission for Energy Efficiency, whose new Director General, Odon de Buen, is a leading expert and advocate of increased action on energy efficiency and has been well known in the country and actually beyond internationally as being a leading light for progress on this agenda. So appointing him to that role is significant, and I certainly think is indicative of the commitment that the new government in Mexico has to making progress on this agenda. The role of SMEs in this has been touched on, both in terms of their contribution to economic growth in Mexico, and also potentially to the challenge of meeting the climate change objectives that Mexico set for itself. SMEs are important to Mexico's economy because they generate over 72% of employment and over half of Mexico's GDP. Nearly 99.8% of businesses in Mexico are SME businesses, and that makes them a hugely important contributor to development in Mexico. We also know from the literature that SMEs are an essential driver of growth and development, especially in emerging market economies. There are three main elements which recur in the small business development economic literature regarding the contribution of SMEs to economic growth. One is SMEs' role in creating a predominant share of new jobs, and these jobs are usually brought about at relatively lower costs than those generated by large companies, which is reflective of the typical conditions of labour abundance and capital scarcity in developing countries. SMEs also function as a seedbed for future industrial growth by being an important source of innovative activity and by functioning as training grounds for entrepreneurial talent and improved export competitiveness. And thirdly, SMEs help increase competitiveness and add flexibility to a country's industrial structure, promoting greater economic dynamism and increasing reliance to economic shocks. They also clearly contribute to Mexico's greenhouse gas emissions. Just over a tenth of Mexico's emissions come from the SME sector. We also know that energy efficiency can help strengthen SMEs' role as an engine of growth in Mexico. Mexican SMEs may have the potential to adopt low-cost energy efficiency measures that could save them around $2 billion in terms of reduced energy costs, as well as reduce emissions by 10 million tonnes per year. The commerce or sort of service sector, when it comes to SMEs, could probably contribute about $8.5 billion Mexican pesos of savings, about $12 billion of savings from industry, and about 8 billion pesos from agriculture. We also know that having reduced their economic costs through energy efficiency, SMEs will be able to strengthen their competitiveness, particularly with regards to China, and through the sale of greener products, create new markets, and mitigate against the future impact of new regulation in the sector. Despite these opportunities, we know that there are a number of barriers that SMEs in Mexico face when it comes to improving energy efficiency. These are barriers that many SMEs face in lots of different countries around the world, but they are relevant, obviously, nonetheless in Mexico. They come in three main categories. One is around what we call human capital. There's a general lack of awareness of the commercial benefits of energy efficiency to SMEs. They also lack the knowledge, the expertise to know which opportunities make most sense for them, what their costs are, and what the sort of business case might be to introduce them into their business. They also lack the time and resource to manage the implementation of new technologies, to select suppliers, to run feasibility studies, etc. There's also a set of barriers around information. Generally, there's a lack of data about energy consumption for their own businesses, or poor visibility of energy costs. There's no benchmarking data so that different SMEs in different sectors can understand how they're doing compared to their competitors. And there's very little sharing of best practice approaches to energy management. Another major barrier to investment in energy efficiency in Mexican SMEs is finance. There are a number of issues here. One is the high cost of purchasing energy efficient equipment. But a really key barrier is the high cost of finance. The cheapest possible finance that's available for SMEs to invest in energy efficiency equipment is from FIDE, the Federal Commission for Energy Efficiency that's set up by the utility CFE, which involves rates of 14%. But there isn't a great deal of capital that's available from that source, and if the banks are to be relied on for the provision of finance, SMEs struggle. The cost of finance for the commercial banks is very, very high, mostly because banks are pretty risk averse in Mexico. There's a very restricted market with only 6 major banks controlling the lion's share of the market. The SMEs the world over are facing difficulties accessing credit, largely because they, as everyone knows, don't have the sorts of assets that banks are looking for to guarantee loans against. SMEs involve higher transaction costs because they're smaller and there are more of them, so banks tend to stay clear. And banks often don't understand the commercial nature of energy efficiency projects. They tend to see the cost and not the cash flow that would result from energy efficiency savings that would pay off the loans. So SMEs, I'm afraid, in Mexico suffer from all of those barriers to doing more to invest in energy efficiency. Now, there isn't a blank sheet when it comes to action to address some of those barriers in Mexico. There are a number of existing programs that are underway, but there are a number of gaps, nonetheless, that limit the transformational potential of energy efficiency in Mexico. Amongst the most advanced programs probably are those led by SME, the Energy Ministry, particularly through its formerly named PAEM program, now known as the Ecocredito program, which comes in 2 forms, the Masivo program and the Individual program. That's very much in development, certainly as far as the latter of the 2 of those initiatives is concerned, but with the potential to contribute towards some limited funding and increased capacity building for SMEs to do more on energy efficiency. Other initiatives include those led by FIDE, as already mentioned, and what was called the Fondo Pymes, which is now the INADEM initiative under Economia, the Ministry for Business, which isn't focused on energy efficiency per se, but is very much focused on the needs of SMEs and the challenge of improving their competitiveness through better management. And of course, improved energy efficiency could be one of those better management tools. But as I said, overall, despite the number of initiatives in this space in Mexico, the key barriers really remain. There is insufficient finance. What finance exists is expensive. There are some initiatives to improve awareness, but there is really no substantial national awareness raising campaign for SMEs to better understand the benefits of energy efficiency to their business. And there's quite limited provision of advice when it comes to helping SMEs understand what set of technologies or introduction of measures makes most sense for them given the sector that they're in. With that in mind, the Carbon Trust was asked by the previous Mexican President's office to design a high-level SME energy efficiency program to address some of the gaps that SMEs face, based on the experience that the Carbon Trust has had in running very successful, high-impact energy efficiency programs for SMEs here in the UK. The objective of the scheme in Mexico would be to encourage and support Mexican SMEs to improve energy efficiency, very much with a view to helping them reduce their operating costs as well as mitigating the growth of Mexico's carbon emissions. So a contribution to economic development by making SMEs more competitive and opening up markets for energy efficiency services and technologies is a key priority of the programme, as well as to leverage sustainable sources of funding so that the programme can achieve maximum impact in terms of energy and carbon in a cost-effective way. The initial target market for the programme is for SMEs of about 10 to 250 employees, which make up about 5% of the SME sector in Mexico. That sector is responsible for employing about 4.2 million people, 10% of employment, and a turnover which is worth about 17% of GDP. But several elements of the programme could also indirectly support much smaller businesses. So what would our programme look like? It would have three main elements. The first is coordination and promotion. There's a real need we see for both a coordination of efforts when it comes to the initiatives that are underway in Mexico to support SME energy efficiency and promotion. In terms of promotion in particular, we envisage a programme of national awareness raising through the obvious channels that exist in the media, TV, radio, press, but also through events, through websites, direct mail, but also using the vendors and suppliers of energy efficient technology, who are often the closest organisations to the SMEs when it comes to the sale of energy efficient equipment. So that's a key aspect of the programme. Another is increasing the amount of advice that's available for SMEs. We envisage this in two forms: one, remote advice, and another set of activities that would involve face-to-face advice for SMEs. In terms of the remote advice, we envisage providing information and advice cost-effectively to smaller SMEs in this way, with information and advice on energy-efficient technologies and suppliers through a website with website content, downloadable publications, as well as a call centre to help provide immediate advice or redirect SMEs to relevant sources of advice or indeed potential sources of funding, as well as to follow or pursue campaigns to promote particular initiatives. We also envisage, as I mentioned, providing face-to-face advice through this programme. This is potentially for some of the slightly larger SMEs, and we envisage doing this through events with regional workshops, webinars, as well as on-site energy audits, providing immediate advice and post-survey reports to SMEs to help them understand which energy-efficient technologies they should invest in and which suppliers might help them actually implement them. And lastly, we envisage the programme involving a major finance component. There's clearly a need for Mexican SMEs to access more affordable finance, and one of the key objectives of this programme will be to provide SMEs with low interest loans for investment in energy efficient technology. We envisage doing this through a revolving fund so that the capital will be replenished by repayments by SMEs for reinvestment in energy efficiency technologies for SMEs in an initial period of 5 years. We envisage the advice centre helping field inquiries. There'll be a very simple online application for loans through the website, or paper applications where necessary through technology suppliers and installers, and a pretty straightforward process to manage the loan scheme. We envisage the loan scheme very much tied into the other elements of the program, so that the overall program was well integrated with the coordination promotion function, the advice function, and finance, sitting very much alongside each other. Clearly, the coordination and sort of promotion of benefits and the advice functions are very cost-effective ways of improving improving energy efficiency amongst SMEs, and would be very relevant to the small as well as the medium-sized companies in Mexico. The finance, as I said earlier, might be more relevant to the larger SMEs, potentially towards the sort of 250 employee mark, but a key element of the program nonetheless. We envisage the program reaching about 150,000 SMEs over 5 years, with about 30,000 calls. We think that a call centre would manage, as well as emails, about 100 events each year, with 40 SMEs at each, so about 4,000 SMEs benefiting from that. And for the larger SMEs, we envisage about 2,000 audits, and about 6,000 loans being made to SMEs. So overall, a program that would reach about 150,000 SMEs, but with more direct support to 10,000 larger SMEs. We calculate the impact of this program to be significant. We think over the lifetime of measures introduced, it could lead to the creation of 27,000 jobs, $1.4 billion in energy cost savings, and nearly 6 million tonnes of CO2 reduced. The cost of the program would be about $33.5 million for awareness raising, advice and management of the loans program. We envisage a loans pot or pool of about $100 million over 5 years, putting an overall cost of about $134 million to the program. We're very glad to say that the Mexican government itself is very supportive of the initiative. The Mexican Energy Ministry, SENER, the National Commission for Energy Efficiency, CONOE, the Ministry of the Environment, SEMARNAT, and the Ministry of Business, Economia are very supportive. We're also very glad to say that the UK's International Climate Fund, a global funding facility which supports climate resilient development and low carbon growth in emerging economies, asked us to submit a proposal to fund the initiative. It approved a concept bid to provide about $80 million in funding for the concessional finance element of the program earlier in the year, and we're now working very closely with the Department for Energy and Climate Change here in the UK and the British Foreign Office to develop a full business case for the program. As part of that, we're working with the Mexican government to identify the most appropriate and most effective delivery partners and implementers of the program, and potential sources of additional funding, particularly for the awareness raising and advice elements of the program, and also some additional co-funding for the loans pot. We're confident that this program will have the sort of transformational impact that the International Climate Fund is looking for. We're confident because we've both understood the Mexican market over a couple of years of working there, but also chiefly know how to run programs like this based on our experience in the UK. Very similar set of barriers are faced by SMEs here: lack of awareness, lack of confidence, lack of funding, and we've developed programs that address each of those barriers here in the UK through a large-scale advice program to provide energy saving expertise, implementation support to make energy efficiency as easy as possible for SMEs, helping them identify suppliers and installers, as well as creating energy efficiency finance schemes. In fact, we've run 2 large-scale energy efficiency finance schemes. The first was from 2003 to 2011, where we lent over £190 million of UK government money at 0 interest to over 7,000 SMEs, demonstrating the market for energy efficiency finance. leading to a successor scheme from 2011 working with Siemens Financial Services, which provides about £550 million of finance, or certainly makes that available to SMEs to lend to them at commercial interest rates. So far, about £50 million that has been lent. The objective really of both is to help SMEs make the most of opportunities that we know are zero net cost. In other words, the repayments needed to pay off the loans come from the savings to energy bills generated by the technologies themselves. So from a commercial point of view, they make a lot of sense. Overall, we know from our experience of the Common Trust in terms of tracking and monitoring the impact of our programs that energy efficiency advice and finance programs are very cost effective. If we take a snapshot of the experience that the Common Trust had in 2009 to 10, from an initial program cost of £32 million, we leveraged private capital investment of £252 million to invest in energy efficient technology. Over the lifetime of those measures, we know that £716 million will be saved in terms of energy costs reduced or avoided, producing a net cost saving over the lifetime of the projects of £432 million. It's a very cost-effective means of intervening to ensure energy efficiency is acted on. We also know that this approach hasn't just worked in the UK, but that it's worked elsewhere. In Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, North Africa, the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, has recognised very similar barriers in its priority countries. It's responded by both building the capacity of local banks and providing nearly €2 billion in finance across 15 countries to drive demand with marketing campaigns and free case-by-case advisory services and implementation support, just as we recommend in Mexico. We also know in Latin America that the Inter-America Investment Corporation, supported by the IDB, the Inter-America Development Bank, and the Nordic Fund has set up a very similar program, the Green PYME program, PYME meaning SME in Spanish. We've seen this initiative run in a number of Central and South American countries, and the program has been successful in tackling barriers facing SMEs and helping them achieve sustainable growth and gain competitiveness. So overall, we're very excited by this initiative in Mexico. We see it as having the potential to both help the new government's ambitions when it comes to economic development by improving the bottom line of SMEs in Mexico, helping them become more competitive, to drive productivity and growth, as well as reduce emissions in a really important sector. We also hope that it will demonstrate to the commercial banks the viability of energy efficiency finance projects, and therefore help make this initiative sustainable over the long term. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Simon, for that really interesting insight into Mexico and energy efficiency programs. Just as a reminder, this webinar and all our other webinars will be available on the Carbon Trust's YouTube channel and online on our website. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.